"Sorry, this table's for family only," my brother sneered, motioning to a lonely chair by the trash can. Everyone burst out laughing as I sat there alone. When the $3,200 bill came, the waiter handed it to me. I smiled calmly and said, "Oh, that's not my table. My name is Eli. I'm 34 years old, and for my entire life I've been the responsible one. Not the favorite, not the rebel, not the golden child. Just the one who showed up on time, paid his bills, and remembered birthdays. I work in finance. I live alone. I don't make a fuss. My family is loud, close-knit in that performative, public display of affection kind of way, and exceptionally skilled at pretending everything is perfect while sweeping any real, messy problems under a very thick, very expensive rug. I've always existed on the periphery of that performance. Involved but not embraced. The kind of relative you invite to the wedding, but never ask to be in the photos. Growing up, my brother Mason was the undisputed star. Charismatic, reckless, and forever tumbling from one self-inflicted crisis to the next, yet he always, somehow, landed squarely on his feet. He possessed a smug, effortless charm that my parents consumed like an addictive drug. Even when he dropped out of college, flamed out of 2 lucrative jobs, and ended up moving back into his childhood bedroom at 28, they defended him as if he were a misunderstood genius on the cusp of a world-changing breakthrough. I, on the other hand, paid my own way through state school, have held the same stable, unglamorous job for over a decade, and quietly helped cover a significant portion of my parents' mortgage when my dad's hours were cut at the factory. None of it ever seemed to tip the scales. It didn't earn me a seat at the metaphorical head of the table, or even a consistent place in the center of the family portrait. I told myself I never let it get to me. That was the story I sold even to myself. Kept my head down. I sent the checks. I replied to the group texts. I showed up for every holiday, birthday, and awkward backyard barbecue, smiling through the small, sharp jabs that were always carefully disguised as jokes. "Eli, you're so serious. Loosen up, man, it's just a party." "Oh, we figured you'd be too busy. You're always working." I took it all in stride. I think a part of me, a naive, hopeful part one kept locked deep down, genuinely believed that if I just kept showing up, kept being reliable, kept being good, one day they would finally see me. Not as the family's background funder, but as a son, a brother, someone to be cherished, not just utilized. That fragile illusion shattered completely last fall. It began as so many family catastrophes do, with a dinner. Mason had just gotten engaged to a woman named Brooke, whom my mother had instantly dubbed an absolute angel sent from heaven. My parents, swept up in the euphoria, decided to throw a massive, celebratory engagement dinner at a swanky rooftop restaurant downtown. It was decidedly not the kind of place they could normally afford, a fact that, in hindsight, should have been my first clue. I got the call a few weeks prior. "Eli, sweetheart," my mom said, her voice dripping with that particular syrupy tone she reserves exclusively for when she wants something. "We'd love it if you could make it to Mason and Brooke's engagement dinner. It's going to be such a special night for the family." "Of course," I said without hesitation. "Just send me the details." "And if it's not too much trouble," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we were hoping you might help with the reservation. Just to hold it. We'll pay you back, obviously." I should have known right then. "We'll pay you back" was a phrase that, in our family lexicon, translated directly to "you will never see this money again, and we will be offended if you ever mention it." But like always, I agreed. I called the restaurant, booked their best private space for 20 people, and gave them my credit card for the hefty $500 deposit. I didn't mind. Not really. This was Mason's night, his moment in the sun. And maybe, just maybe, if I helped make it perfect, I'd finally feel like I was truly a part of it. The night of the dinner, I showed up right on time, 7 p.m. sharp. I wore a dark navy suit, a freshly pressed white shirt, and a pair of new cufflinks I'd been saving for a special occasion. I carried a nice bottle of vintage champagne for the couple and a custom-printed card with their new initials embossed on the front. The rooftop was stunning. String lights glittered overhead, casting a soft glow on elegant floral centerpieces. A three-piece jazz band played something smooth and unobtrusive in the corner. And there they were. My parents, Mason, Brooke, her entire family, a smattering of their friends. Everyone was already there, drinks in hand, laughing, talking, clinking glasses in a symphony of shared joy. I smiled and walked over, my footsteps silent on the plush outdoor rug, expecting at least a nod of recognition, a pat on the back. "Hey, glad you're here." Instead, Mason turned to me, that familiar, smug grin plastered on his face. "Oh, hey," he said, his eyes flicking dismissively over the champagne bottle in my hand. "Glad you made it." Then he gestured with his thumb toward a single, sad-looking fold-out chair set off to the side, tucked awkwardly next to a service station and a large, black trash bin. "No less." He chuckled. "Sorry, man. This table's for family only. But there's a spot for you right over there." I actually blinked. I waited for the punchline, for someone to say, "Just kidding," and pull up a chair. I looked at my mom. She offered me a tight-lipped, strained smile, the one she uses when she desperately wants to avoid conflict. My dad chuckled, an awkward, nervous sound, and raised his glass as if to say, "What can you do?" Brooke didn't even look up from her phone. And then, as if on cue, a few of Mason's friends laughed. Not a loud, raucous laugh, but a soft, complicit chuckle. I stood there, frozen for a second too long. 1,000 responses flashed through my mind. Sharp, witty, furious retorts. But my throat felt like it was packed with sand. My ears burned with a familiar, childhood heat. I felt 13 again, being told I couldn't be in my cousin's wedding photos because my shirt was the wrong shade of blue. So, I did what I always did. I swallowed the lump. I accepted my role. I walked to the folding chair, set my expensive champagne on the floor beside me like a common beer, and sat down. I didn't even take my coat off. A waiter glided over. "Excuse me, sir, are you with the party?" he asked quietly. I just nodded, unable to form words. He didn't press. He simply handed me a glass of ice water and moved on, his professional demeanor not quite masking a flicker of pity. I sat there for nearly 2 hours. I watched them laugh. I listened to them toast to family and new beginnings. I saw Mason open gifts, making a theatrical show of each one. I watched him give a long, heartfelt speech about how lucky he was to be surrounded by my closest people, my real family. I saw my mom dab tears from her eyes when Brooke called her the best future mother-in-law a girl could ask for. Not a single person at that main table looked my way. Not once. No one asked if I wanted to order a drink, if I was cold, if I existed. I was a ghost at my own brother's feast. Eventually, dessert was served, an elaborate, multi-layered chocolate cake dusted with edible gold flakes. The band switched to a slow, romantic tune. The sun dipped below the city skyline, painting the clouds in hues of orange and purple, and I realized with a cold, clear certainty that I had become completely invisible. Then the check came. I saw the waiter approach the main table, a slim, black leather folder in his hand. He paused, glanced around the laughing group, then looked down at the credit card slip on file. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. He walked over. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice low and discreet. "The total for the event comes to $3,218.76. Should I run the same card for the final amount?" Every single person at the main table turned to look. The conversation died instantly. Mason raised an eyebrow, a picture of casual nonchalance. "Oh yeah," he said, waving a hand in my direction. "Eli's got it." The waiter looked at me, awaiting confirmation. And that's when I smiled. It was a calm, slow, measured smile that felt foreign on my face. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady and clear, carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "Not my table," I said. "I was told this was for family only." The silence that followed was so sharp, so absolute, it felt like the air itself had snapped in half. Mason's mouth dropped open slightly. My mom's face crumpled in confusion. My dad sat up straighter, his brow furrowed. Brooke's father, a stern-looking man in a crisp blazer, stared at Mason with dawning disbelief. The waiter hesitated, the leather folder feeling suddenly heavy in his hand. "Sir, you made the reservation?" "I did," I nodded agreeably. "And I paid the deposit. But I'm not with them." I gestured to the main table. "I'm over here. At the side table." I stood up slowly, deliberately. I picked up my coat, brushed a piece of invisible lint from the sleeve, and nodded toward the trash can. "You know, where I belong, apparently." You could have heard a pin drop. Then, you could have heard the collective, psychic thud of jaws hitting the floor. For a full 5 seconds, nobody moved. The waiter was stranded in no man's land, holding the bill like a lit stick of dynamite. Mason looked like I'd just thrown a glass of water in his face. My mother's eyes were wide, her mind visibly racing, trying to figure out how her perfectly orchestrated evening had spiraled so completely out of her control. "Wait, Lai," she said, her voice low and shaky. "What are you doing?" I shrugged, feigning an innocence I did not feel. "Just following the seating chart, Mom. Mason said this table was for family only. I assumed that meant I wasn't included." I looked back at the waiter. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I wasn't welcomed. "So, I won't be paying." "Don't be ridiculous," Mason snapped, the charming smirk finally cracking, revealing something much uglier and more petulant beneath. "It was just a joke, man. Lighten up. You always take everything so personally." The entire rooftop had gone quiet. Even the jazz band had faltered, the saxophonist lowering his instrument to watch the scene unfold. Every eye was on me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to shrink beneath their gaze. I felt solid. "Yeah," I said, my voice slow and deliberate. "That's the problem, Mason. You've always thought everything is a joke, as long as you're not the one paying the price." Brooke was now looking back and forth between us, her expression one of dawning horror, as if she was just realizing the charming, chaotic man she'd agreed to marry might have a cruel streak. Her father, Mr. Whitaker, fixed Mason with a hard, incredulous stare. "You invited this man to your engagement dinner," he said, his voice like chipped ice, "and you seated him next to the trash can?" Mason scoffed, a defensive, nervous sound, and immediately looked to my mom for backup. She straightened her spine, composing herself, and painted that tight, placating smile back on her face. "Let's not blow this all out of proportion, everyone. Eli is just being dramatic. He's always been so sensitive." I almost laughed out loud. There was her go-to line. The universal key for dismissing any and all of my feelings. "He's just sensitive. He's just tired. He's overreacting." Any excuse to avoid acknowledging that something genuinely cruel had happened, and that she had been a willing accomplice. The waiter, looking profoundly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to interrupt again, but the restaurant needs to process the bill before we can close the tab on the private space. If the card on file won't be used, I'll need an alternate form of payment immediately." Silence. I turned and started walking toward the elevator. That's when my dad finally spoke, his voice gruff and exasperated. "Eli, come on, son. You've already paid for half of it. You might as well just finish it." I stopped cold. That sentence, "you've already paid for half," was the final straw. It was the sound of something inside me, something that had been bending for 34 years, finally and irreparably snapping. I turned back to face him. The calm I felt was unnerving. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice low but piercing in the quiet room. "I did pay the deposit. I even called 3 different restaurants to find one with a rooftop view, just like Mason wanted. I picked the date specifically so it wouldn't conflict with his precious football schedule. I personally approved the custom floral arrangements because Mom said fake flowers would look cheap in the photos. I paid the $500 non-refundable deposit without even blinking. And I showed up. On time. Alone. In a new suit to support my brother. I took a step closer, my eyes locked on my father's. And what did I get in return? A folding chair next to a garbage bin and a, "Sorry, family only." I turned my gaze to Mason. "So now, little brother, you get to figure it out. You and your real family." Mason's face was now flushed a deep, blotchy red. He stood up, trying to puff out his chest, but it only made him look like a petulant child playing at being a man. "You're making a scene," he hissed. "No," I replied, my voice flat and final. "I'm drawing a line." And I walked away. I didn't wait for the elevator. I pushed open the heavy door to the stairwell and started down, my footsteps echoing on the concrete with a rhythmic, pounding finality that matched the adrenaline roaring in my ears. I walked down 23 flights, and with every step, a little more of the weight I'd been carrying for a lifetime seemed to fall away. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a physical slap, sharp and bracing. I loosened my tie, the silk feeling like a noose I'd finally slipped, and just kept walking. I didn't have a destination. I just knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was not going back. Not to that restaurant, not to that dynamic, not to that version of myself. I thought, naively, that my exit would be the end of it. A dramatic moment, a few days of awkward phone calls, maybe a half-hearted, guilt-tripping apology, and then the slow, inevitable return to the status quo, with the whole incident swept under that plush, expensive rug. I had no idea how deep the consequences of that single refusal would run. Later that night, long after I'd gotten home, still wearing my suit, holding that unopened, condemned bottle of champagne, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. First, a text from Mason, "Dude. Seriously. You couldn't have just paid the check and talked to me after? Now everything's weird." Then, another from my mom, "You embarrassed us in front of Brooke's entire family. Was that your goal? Revenge?" I didn't reply. I just stared at the words, feeling a strange numbness. Then, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello. Hi, Eli." It was Brooke. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "It's Brooke. I know we don't really talk, but can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, my guard instantly going up. "Did you really pay for everything? The deposit, the flowers, all of it?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Yeah, I did." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "They told my dad you offered," she finally said, her voice small. "That it was your idea. A gift." That stopped me cold. The audacity of it took my breath away. "I never offered," I said slowly, ensuring each word was clear. "They asked." Said yes. "I didn't expect anything in return, Brooke. But I definitely didn't do it for show." She let out a long, shaky sigh. "Well, my dad's furious. He thought you'd volunteered as a kind gesture, but now he's saying he wouldn't have agreed to the restaurant if he'd known it was being paid for by someone they basically shoved in the corner." She paused. "He said Mason and your parents made him look like a fool." I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Another part felt a pang of sympathy for Brooke, who was suddenly finding herself in the middle of a war she never signed up for. "I'm not calling to get involved," she added quickly. I thought you should know." I thanked her and we hung up. The numbness was gone, replaced by a cold certainty. The fallout had only just begun, and it was rolling downhill toward Mason faster than anyone could have predicted. Over the next few days, the situation escalated in ways my family clearly hadn't anticipated. It started with the family fun group chat, the massive text thread that usually only came to life for birthday wishes and blurry pictures of pot roast. It had been silent since the dinner, but now it erupted. "Mom, Eli, we need to talk. Call me when you have a minute." "Mason, Mom, you seriously messed things up with Brooke's family. You owe us a fix." "Dad, Mason, this is getting out of hand. Just apologize and let's move on." I didn't reply. It wasn't about the chair anymore. It wasn't even about the $3,218.76. It was about the 34 years that came before it. The years of being the emergency contact, the designated driver, the backup wallet, the emotional sponge. I had finally said no, and the foundation of our entire relationship was cracking under the strain. What made it worse, or perhaps, from a certain perspective, better, was that Brooke's father, Mr. Whitaker, was not a man who took kindly to being made a fool of. Through Trent, a decent guy who was one of Mason's few remaining friends with a conscience, I heard the details. Mr. Whitaker, a self-made man who valued transparency and integrity above all else, had apparently had a meltdown. He'd paid for Brooke's private schooling, helped her launch her own marketing firm, and had envisioned a smooth, elegant merger of two families. Instead, he discovered the groom's side had lied about the finances and publicly humiliated the one person who had actually facilitated the entire evening. According to Trent, Mr. Whitaker had said at a very tense brunch the following day, "If this is how they treat their own blood, what in God's name will they do to my daughter when she's legally tied to them?" The ripple effects hit Mason with the force of a freight train. Wedding planning was put on an indefinite pause. Brooke had taken her engagement ring off and gone to stay at her parents' condo for a mental reset. The Pinterest boards and wedding website vanished overnight. My mother, in full-scale damage control mode, bypassed texts and calls and sent me a long, meticulously crafted email. The subject line was just one word, "Please." The body of the email was 5 paragraphs of masterful, sugar-coated manipulation. It was all about how she never meant to hurt me, how she never realized I felt so excluded, and how it would mean the world to the family if I'd just be willing to sit down with Mason and smooth things over. It was a masterpiece of non-apology. Nowhere in those 5 paragraphs did the word "sorry" appear. It was all "we didn't realize," and "you misunderstood," and "let's not let one silly night destroy the bond we've built." I stared at that last line for a long time. What bond? The bond where I drove 3 hours through a snowstorm on Christmas Eve to deliver presents because Mom said Mason wasn't in the right headspace to shop for anyone? The bond where I canceled my long-awaited trip to Spain 2 years ago because Dad needed minor surgery and they didn't have the money for a home nurse? The bond where I co-signed the loan for their second car without being asked twice? The same car Mason borrowed and never returned? I let the email sit in my inbox. I didn't delete it, but I didn't reply. 2 days later, my phone rang again. It was my Aunt Karen, my mom's older sister. That surprised me. Karen wasn't the warm, fuzzy type. She was a sharp, no-nonsense businesswoman who ran a successful interior design firm and had always viewed our family's drama with a sort of detached, anthropological amusement. We hadn't spoken in over a year. "Eli," she said, her voice crisp and direct. "I heard about the dinner." "Of course you did," I said, unable to keep the weary sarcasm from my voice. "I'm not calling to scold you," she said quickly. "I'm calling to say it's about time someone shook the tree." That caught me completely off guard. She sighed, a sound that conveyed decades of exasperation. "Look, I know how your parents are. Especially your mother. Everything has to be perfect on the surface. They've been brushing things under the rug for 40 years. But they've leaned on you too much for too long. And Mason, well, he's always gotten away with treating you like some kind of supporting character in the movie of his life." "I appreciate you saying that," I said, my voice quiet with genuine shock. "But why now?" I asked. "Because now the Whitakers are involved," she said, her tone dry. "And your mother is in a full-blown panic. She called me yesterday and asked if I'd be willing to talk some sense into you." I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see it. "And what did you say?" "I told her you didn't need sense. You needed space. And that maybe it was high time they learned how to function without using you as emotional and financial scaffolding." It was the first time in my life I felt like someone in my extended family actually saw me. Not as a utility, not as a punchline, but as a person with valid feelings and legitimate grievances. Later that night, the final, desperate text came from Mason. It was devoid of any pretense of brotherly affection. "Mason, bro, Brooke's dad just canceled the deposit on the wedding venue. Said we're not aligned in values. Fix this." Now, I read it 3 times. The sheer, unvarnished entitlement was breathtaking. "Me, I can't fix this." "Mason, yes you can. Just fix it. And can you help me? I'm broke." And in that moment, I realized he still didn't get it. He still saw me as a tool in his toolbox, a pressure valve to be released, a wallet with a heartbeat. So, I decided to finally fix something, but not in the way he intended. That night, I logged into the old shared bank account I'd set up for him a year ago when he was between jobs. It was an account he was supposed to have closed once he got back on his feet, but he'd forgotten, leaving it open with his gym membership and Spotify subscription linked to it. I'd left a few $1,000s of my own money in there as a silent, unacknowledged safety net for him. A final vestige of my misguided loyalty. I quietly transferred every last cent of my money into a new, private high-yield savings account. Then I picked up the phone, called the bank, and closed the joint account entirely. The next morning, my phone exploded. Mason called me 4 times in a row. On the 5th ring, I picked up. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice frantic and shrill. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice calm. "Bro, I have a date with Brooke tonight. I was going to take her to that stupid, overpriced French place she likes. And my card's bouncing. The app says the account doesn't exist." "I know," I said calmly. "I closed it." "You what?" "You can't just." "I can," I interrupted, my voice flat. "And I did. You told me I wasn't family, Mason. You don't get to use my money if I'm not even allowed at the table." He stammered, sputtered, and then switched tactics, his voice dropping into a wheedling, familiar tone. "Come on, don't do this. You're jealous. Just admit it. You've always hated that I got the attention, and now you're throwing a tantrum because Brooke's dad took my side." I actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Mason," I said. "You really think he's on your side?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Don't worry," I said, echoing the empty platitudes he'd always thrown my way. "You'll figure something out. You always do. Maybe ask Mom to open a new line of credit for you. Or better yet, maybe Mr. Whitaker can teach you how to actually stand on your own 2 feet for once in your life." And I hung up. I blocked his number. The silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I'd heard in weeks. I don't know what Mason did after that. I assume he scrambled, lied, and blamed me some more. But a few hours later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was another email. From Brooke. The subject line was simple: "I think we need to talk." I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the trackpad. This felt different. This felt like the precursor to a final verdict. Taking a deep breath, I clicked it open. It was longer and more personal than I expected. It was polite, yet raw, formal, yet laced with a palpable sense of shock and disillusionment. She started by acknowledging the awkwardness of the dinner and admitting her own blindness. "I was so caught up in planning the perfect night, in being the perfect fiancé, that I didn't stop to see the full picture," she wrote. But she said her father's fury had forced her to look closer. He was furious not just about the money, but about the principle. He said, "If they can publicly humiliate the one person who financially and emotionally supported the entire evening, then I need to seriously reconsider who I'm marrying into." She didn't hold back. She explained that Mason had initially downplayed the whole incident, framing it as a simple misunderstanding that his overly sensitive brother had blown out of proportion. He told her I had insisted on paying, that I'd preferred the quiet of the side table because I was an introvert, that I'd left early due to a work emergency. "But once I talked to the waiter myself," she wrote, "yes, I called the restaurant, the story fell apart completely. Then came the part that truly stole the breath from my lungs. I ended the engagement last night." I read those 6 words over and over again. She explained that the dinner had acted like a key, unlocking a door to a room full of red flags she had previously chosen to ignore. The casual entitlement. The way he spoke about me, and others, with such dismissive cruelty when they weren't around. The way her own concerns were constantly minimized and brushed aside. "He kept saying you were overreacting," she wrote. "But honestly, Eli, you're the only one who reacted with any dignity." She ended the email simply, "I'm not writing this to pit myself against Mason or to drag you into more drama. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the early morning light streaming through the window, rereading her words. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I felt a profound, weary sense of closure. For the first time, someone from the inside had looked at the situation, investigated it, and had not only believed me but had taken decisive action based on that truth. I was being seen, not for what I could provide, but for what I had endured. The next few weeks were eerily quiet. The family fun group chat was dead and buried. Mason's attempted calls ceased. Through the fragile grapevine, I learned he had moved, tail between his legs, back into our parents' house. Brooke had formally returned the ring. Mr. Whitaker had sent out official cancellation notices to all the wedding vendors. I thought that would be the end of it. A slow, quiet settling into a new, permanent silence. But then, one Sunday morning, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find my mother standing on my front porch. She was wearing a long, beige cardigan, holding a Tupperware container of her famous lasagna like a white flag. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her makeup applied too thinly to hide the evidence of a long night. "I brought you dinner," she said, her voice fragile. I didn't reach for it. I just held the door open, my body blocking the entrance, and waited. I wanted to talk, she said. No excuses. That last part surprised me. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at my small kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, just like she did when I was a kid and she had to deliver bad news. The same nervous energy, the same forced attempt at a smile. But this time, there was no undercurrent of passive aggression. No, you're just tired. No, he didn't mean it. She cleared her throat. I owe you an apology. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms. Just one. Her face tightened, but she nodded, a slow, weary gesture. Fair. Probably more than one. She took a shaky breath. I didn't see it. Not because it wasn't there, but because I didn't want to see it. Mason, he's always been so loud. He takes up so much space. And you never asked for anything. You just did. You handled things. You showed up. I guess, we started treating you like a safety net. Something we just assumed would always be there. That's the thing about safety nets, Mom, I said, my voice soft but firm. People only look at them when they're falling. They never look at them when they're climbing. Her lip trembled. She looked down at her hands, studying them as if she'd never seen them before. Your father and I were wrong. We let Mason get away with too much. We let him treat you like you were less. And I can't undo that. I know a lasagna and a sorry won't fix years of imbalance. She finally looked up, and her eyes were filled with a raw, unvarnished regret I had never seen before. But I just wanted you to know. I see it now. And I am sorry. I watched her. For the first time in my 34 years, she wasn't dodging, deflecting, or defending. She wasn't telling me to be the bigger person. She was just sitting there in my quiet kitchen, owning her part in the mess. It wasn't a full absolution, but it was a start. A foundation made of truth, however cracked, instead of one built on lies and pretense. I nodded slowly. Thank you, I said. We didn't talk for long after that. There was too much history, too much water under the bridge for a single conversation to wash it all away. She left the lasagna on the counter. I walked her to the door. She didn't ask me to forgive Mason. She didn't ask me to call my father. She just looked at me, her eyes still sad, and said, "Take care of yourself, Eli." Then she got in her car and drove away. After that, things didn't magically repair themselves. The family didn't suddenly become a source of warmth and unconditional support. But the bleeding stopped. The frantic, demanding messages ceased. My parents started sending individual, respectful texts instead of blasting the group chat. My mom invited me to Thanksgiving a few months later with the caveat, only if you feel up to it. I haven't decided if I'll go. Mason, from what I've heard through the fragile grapevine, is back to working a part-time job at a startup he despises. He's living rent-free in our parents' basement, presumably avoiding eye contact with mirrors and any situation that requires personal accountability. He hasn't reached out, and I am perfectly, peacefully okay with that. As for me, I finally started living. I took the postponed trip to Spain. I walked the cobblestone streets of Barcelona and ate tapas alone at a midnight counter, feeling not lonely, but gloriously free. I bought myself a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones and listened to entire audiobooks in the park without interruption. I read books on boundaries, on family systems, on the quiet strength it takes to break a cycle. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I was broken, but because I realized that healing isn't something you wait for others to grant you. It's an active process. It's what happens when you stop staring at the closed door of their approval and finally turn to face the open window of your own worth. So no, I didn't pay the bill that night, but I finally, decisively, cashed in on 34 years of silent, emotional debt. I collected the principal with interest. And for the first time in my life, I am not sitting in a folding chair next to the trash can, waiting for an invitation that will never come. I am seated, comfortably and without apology, at my own table. And this table? It is mine.